Hey everyone, it's Jenny.
And Angie, hi.
And we are a Terror in the Tri-State,
Where we're going to discuss crimes, murders, conspiracies, and mysteries in the wonderful and creepy area where Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia meet.
So today's case is going to be one of those tough cases to get through. So I'm just going to start off with a viewer discretion is advised. This case, it involves violence against children, rape, and suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
So if any of those things are triggering for you, if you don't want to hear about it, go ahead, just click out of the video, and maybe we'll have another video you'll be interested in. Otherwise, if this is something you think you can handle, then just stick with us for this wild and crazy story.
So yeah, this is one of the more extreme and harder cases for us to research just because it was so brutal and awful.
And it is, like I said, it's one of those cases, it's kind of hard. All the cases are awful and terrible, but when it involves children and this type of, just when you hear about the case, you're going to be like, oh, I understand.
Right. Okay.
So let's start us off where
we are in Warsaw, Kentucky. It is Gallatin County. It's a population of only about 1,700 people. They've never went over 2,000 people, so it's a very small town. It is near Cincinnati, Ohio, Lexington, and Louisville. And this happened in August of 2002. It was unimaginable.
Yeah, it's horrible. So, before we actually talk about what happened in this case, let's talk about the people that are involved. So, first off, we have Carolyn Marksberry. She lived in Warsaw, Kentucky. She had 3 children from a previous marriage. So, she was also remarried, but she had 3 kids from a previous marriage. And their names were Shelby, who was 7, Cody, who was 6, and Courtney, who was 10. They all spelled their names with the C because where Carolyn's name started with the C, and their father, his name also started with the C, so it's kind of cute.
But they had a little theme for their names, so it was very cute.
And Carolyn was appointed as a city clerk in Warsaw, and her husband had a really good job, I think working with steel, and at the time he actually had to go overseas to Spain. So he was overseas on a business trip during when all this occurred. Yes. And then Carolyn also, she had a good friend, I believe her name was Debbie. I don't think we ever got clarification of that, but there was a friend, we'll just say her name was Debbie.
Right.
And Debbie was in a relationship with a guy named Marco Allen Chapman. And apparently he was abusive, and Carolyn was trying to talk Debbie, to get out of this relationship. It's not good for you, you need to get out of that.
Right.
Yes. So, let's talk about Marco Chapman.
Okay, he was born in 1971 in Cabin Creek, West Virginia. His childhood was absolutely atrocious. It was terrible. His parents regularly beat him. His mom had beat him so hard in the head with a skillet he had been unconscious. He also claimed his father had sexually abused him. He dropped out of school when he was only 14. He was in the 8th grade, so he, didn't get very much school. He was already, by the age of 14, in very hard drugs and drinking a lot.
It was like PCP, cocaine, heroin, meth.
Which is really young to be introduced to those sorts of drugs. In 1994, he went to federal prison. He had pled guilty to bank robbery in Texas. He was a model inmate.
Yeah, I think the inmates, they described him as the kid. He had like a young baby face.
And that was his nickname, the kid.
The kid, yeah.
And sometime in the year 2000, he was found guilty.
No, he served 4 years and he was released from prison.
So, yeah, sorry. So, and then sometime in the year 2000, he was found guilty of assaulting a University of Virginia student. I'm not sure what his punishment was for that.
Yeah,
some stuff is still, it's kind of hard to research. There's not as much information out there on some of his previous dealings.
Yeah, it's not a whole, there's some information, but not a whole lot.
Right.
So, August 23rd, 2002, which this just seems so, I mean, I know we're in 2021, almost 2022, so this is almost 20 years ago, but this still seems like recent. Like, we're used to talking about cases back in the 80s. So this is now in the 2000s, 2002, which, you know, I remember that year very well. It was, you know, the year before I graduated high school. You know, I was young and carefree, and I didn't really remember hearing much about this case, but I feel like if I was as into true crime as much as I am now, I would have definitely heard about it.
Right.
So, August 23rd, 2002, sometime after 4 in the morning, Mark Chapman, his full name is Marco Allen Chapman, but I believed he went by Mark. So, Mark Chapman, he drove to Carolyn Marksberry's house. He knocked on the door and asked Carolyn if he could use the phone. She knows who he is, so she lets him in, which was a terrible, terrible mistake. When she let him in, he had with him a knife and some duct tape. And so what he does to get a hold of the situation, he punches Carolyn in the stomach. And then he duct tapes her up and takes her into the back bedroom. He also rips off a cord from a vacuum cleaner and also ties her up with that, so she's bound. He then proceeds to rape her, and then after he's done that, he begins to stab her. He stabbed her so many times, the knife actually broke, so he went to the kitchen to get another knife. So during this time, her 6-year-old Cody, he heard his mother's screams, and he went to her bedroom to see what was going on. She told him to go back to his room. He was just having a bad dream. So instead of going back to his room, he goes into his sister's room. His sisters share a room. And he wakes up his eldest sister, Courtney, who's 10 at the time. He whispered to Courtney that he thinks mom needs help. She's hurt. So he and Courtney then go out into the hall, and that's where they run into Mark Chapman. And Mark says that their mom's hurt and they need to call 911. So he starts leading them into the kitchen, and then he turned around and he stabbed Courtney in the chest, neck, and face. So she falls to the ground.
And she plays dead. And her ear was slashed too, I believe. But that was really smart thinking of her, because she played dead and then watched as he stabbed her 6-year-old brother.
Cody. Yeah. He stabbed him in the back, and he also slit his throat. Which, this is just awful. So like I said, it's gonna be a tough one for us to like get through without getting emotional, because that is just oof.
Just horrible, just heartbreaking.
So then Mark, he goes into the girl's bedroom, and that's where he stabs 7-year-old Shelby. And Shelby had a bunch of defensive wounds, so she tried to fight this off. Like, she probably had no idea what was happening. She was probably coming out of her sleep, and somebody's coming at her with a knife. So he proceeds to stab her, and he also slits her throat. So that's just horrible, horrifying, just ugh.
So while that's going on, Courtney told Cody, little 6-year-old Cody, that she's still alive. She's going to go get help. And he begged her not to leave him. And she said, I will be right back.
She says, I gotta go get help.
I gotta go get help.
And this is something that haunts her probably to this day, is, you know, after she did leave, he did pass away. I mean, it was only like a couple minutes. Like, he was probably not going to survive if help came. But still, to know, you know, that's your baby brother, and you're trying to take care of him, and then, ooh, that's just...
And you have to leave him in his last moment, because you do have to go get help.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Courtney leaves. Yeah, she leaves the house.
And I believe Marco heard the door shut and saw that Courtney was gone. So he fled.
So he's fleeing the scene.
Right.
And then during this time, Carolyn, who is still tied up in the bedroom, she manages to gnaw through her restraints. She had to crawl over her dead son's body. I mean, that is, oh man. And she eventually, now she is, of course, stabbed. You know, she's got all these stab wounds on her.
She's horribly injured.
She's naked. She's horribly injured.
She's still, like, somewhat tied up. Has to crawl over to a neighbor's, like, scooting and crawling over to a neighbor's house where she bangs on the door with her head.
With her head to get their attention. So eventually, I guess by this time, the police had been notified. They are there at this terrible, horrific scene. Courtney was wounded and she was taken to Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And Carolyn had, like I said, many stab wounds. She had a collapsed lung and was in critical condition. So she underwent 5 hours of emergency surgery, but she did survive this horrible ordeal. So, if you want to...
Yeah. Okay, so later that day, Marco Chapman was arrested in West Virginia, 8 hours after the crime had taken place. He confessed to the crime. He told the West Virginia authorities he was going to go out into the woods and just die. And he asked one of those police officers to do him a favor and put a bullet in his head. He was arraigned in Charleston, West Virginia, and he was charged with 5 charges. 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of assault, 2 counts of burglary. And he was extradited back to Kentucky. The district judge sends the felony case to the grand jury. He pled not guilty to the 5 charges.
So, on January 14th, 2004, during a routine transfer, so they were transferring him to his pretrial hearing, he managed to get himself unshackled. He got his legs unshackled. Now, his hands were still restrained, but he got his hands, or his feet unshackled, and he tried to run away. Now, he got about 10 yards, so he didn't get very far from where he was, and the officers took him down. He was hoping that the officers would just shoot and kill him. For some reason, he wanted the police officers to kill him. He wanted to do what's called suicide by cop. So a lot of criminals will think, okay, I've done something horrible. I don't want to have to kill myself. I'm going to make somebody else do it for me. So he had that in his head, which I don't know why he initially pled not guilty to all of these charges.
Yeah, it was very strange.
Because the next little bit that we're about to go through, I mean, he confesses to everything. So in October of 2004, he changed his plea to guilty, and he asked to be put to death. He wanted the death penalty.
He fired his attorneys, all the legal proceedings. He wanted that to stop. That was anything that was going to prevent his execution. He wanted to be sentenced to death.
Yeah, he didn't want any appeals. He was like, okay, just find me guilty and sentence me to death and be over and done with it. So on December 14th, 2004, he was finally sentenced to death without a jury trial. He didn't want any appeals. He just wanted the death penalty. He stated, I guess it's my Christian upbringing. Suicide is unforgivable. I figure if I'm not doing it myself, it's not suicide. But you murdered 2 babies.
Right. So, in his mind, the suicide was unforgivable. Worse than but that? The murder and rape wasn't. So, I don't know what his thought process was.
I don't either. It's
very bizarre.
Yeah. So in his final statement, so this is right before he was about to be put to death, he actually did a final statement, and he did have some final words. In his final statement, it read, I don't know why I did the things I did, and I know the hate of me over that night must be overwhelming. But Carolyn and Courtney, you have to know that wasn't who I was or am. I am not a monster, even though I did a monstrously evil thing. That is why I gave my life willingly as well as quickly in hopes that you know how truly sorry I am. I hurt and ache daily for the loss I've created in the Marksbury family, but I hurt as well. I don't know if I deserve heaven after what I did, but I pray with all my heart that I find some sort of peace and happiness after my last breath. Okay. I get, okay, I get his words and all that, but it's still, I don't know. There's just something about this guy that just really irks me. I just don't know what it is, but
he's so worried about his eternal
life and death
and going to heaven and stuff, and yet he like terrorized and brutalized this family. And I mean, it was said that maybe he was coming off a crack binge and that he wasn't in his right mind, but
a lot of people come off drugs and they don't do this type of horrific stuff.
Or they have a horrible, straight up horrific childhoods where they're, abused and raped, and they don't go and do this kind of thing. So it just, something about him just seems very cold, and he's very one of those, like, internal, like, everything is about him kind of thing to me, studying this case.
And his final words right before he was executed were, "Carolyn, I want you to know I am truly sorry. I don't know why it happened. This is the man I'm willing to give my life." So, I mean, I think he did. I mean, he tried to show remorse, but I don't know how
authentic it was.
Right. I think he was more worried. He was more worried about his own death than what
he had done to these people. Like he had like a really large last final breakfast, last final meal that was like something out of a steak restaurant.
Yeah.
And it just, if you're that remorseful, I mean, I've seen people on death row, final meal is like they don't want anything because they know what they've done is horrible. They don't even deserve a final meal.
Yeah, it's like
just there's something very cold and very off-putting about this, I guess. And plus, in a lot of these criminals that, they have their dealings with other criminals and people get killed, but when it's children that haven't done anything,
they were just in their home,
just in their house in the middle of the night, and they're scared to death that their mom's getting hurt. I just know that today I had a nap, and after researching this case, I had a nightmare about this case. I mean,
it's one of those that, like I said, it gets under your skin. It's very emotional, and it's one that's hard to talk about.
Yeah. Because the children were 6 and 7 years old.
Yeah.
And the 10-year-old, she survived. The mother survived. But at what cost?
At what cost? They had to have survivor's guilt. They had to have that.
Yeah.
You realize how much trauma and probably PTSD they've suffered throughout their whole life.
I remember in researching this, her husband said that the wife, Carolyn, she couldn't be left alone. All she'd do is have nightmares, and she'd be screaming all the time, probably because she's reliving it over and over and over.
Yes. It's just horrible.
It's a horrible case.
So,
and we do want to make the victims known that this is about them.
Not about Chapman.
Right.
I mean, ugh. 37-year-old Mark Chapman was executed on November 21st, 2008 by lethal injection. He's also been the last person executed in Kentucky. Now, Kentucky still does have a death row.
And a death penalty. But it's not used that often, really.
It is not.
It
surprisingly, when we were researching this, I always knew we were a death penalty state, but I didn't realize
the difference in like Texas, where it's
Texas or Florida
have a lot, right?
Whereas Kentucky,
they seem to take their time, and they're not real willy-nilly with putting people to death by lethal injection.
Now, Carolyn Marksberry, during this time on Mark's execution, she also issued a statement, and she said, "I believe the tears shed today should be for the victims of this crime, not Marco Chapman. Perhaps now, though, not only can our family and community start to heal, but Cody and Shelby can rest in peace. So I like that she made a statement, and I like that she stood up for
her children and said it's about them. It's not about Mark Chapman and his
whatever that was.
Right. It was very, very bizarre that he had this religious ideation that suicide was something so horrible and unforgivable, yet
murdering kids, like
what 2 little children.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, it's very disturbing.
And I understand he was diagnosed with a bunch of psychological
mental illness
and mental illness. Now, you know, I'm not downplaying that at all, and I'm not downplaying he had a horrible childhood, but that is not an excuse for
to do
what he did. There's just no excuse for that.
It seems like the motive for him doing it that night was either he knew Carolyn's husband was out of town job training with his steel company and was just wanted to rob her, and it turned really ugly. But then he was also mad at Carolyn because Carolyn convinced Marco's girlfriend to leave him because he was so abusive and was so crazy and was so wrapped up in drugs. So that's the only 2 motives that we can really find in the case.
And
but
he
either
probably, with him, he probably would have committed a crime like this to somebody else. I feel like he was eventually just going to escalate, implode, explode, whatever you want to call it, and do something horrific.
Right.
So that's everything on this case. I know that was super depressing if you got through the video. Let us know that you liked the video. Give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. We'd love to have you here. We try to upload. We've got 3 videos now, so we're going to try to keep doing this regularly, but we do want to research stuff before we actually post a video.
Right. We'll give a shout out to Southern Fried True Crime podcast
with Erica Kelley. She did a great podcast on this case. It's really the only podcast. There's not even a YouTube video about this case. So you should check that out. I'll link it down below this video. There's no investigation discovery shows. A lot of those shows tend to stray away from child killings because it's so horrible and traumatizing, and there's just never any kind of justification ever. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. It really is. So, like I said, I'll leave the link down below to her podcast, and hopefully you subscribe, stick with us, share our video.
Share, like, subscribe.
All that good stuff.
Try to have a regular upload schedule, but we, like she said, we are going to research our cases and try to really get the facts all laid out for you as we expand and grow our channel.
So we will see you in the next one.
Bye.